I was excited to have you here is that you are like right at the center of this just big question that I have about private equity. That the industry is really splintering. We're seeing these giant money managers, Blackstone, KKR, Apollo, trillion-dollar firms, who are really in the financial product business. And then firms, I think like yours, that have made a different bet, doing one or two things and trying to do them exceptionally well. It just seems to me there's this tension and there's going to be this shakeout, and I'm just curious sort of how you think about that.
We think about it a lot. First, thank you for having me. We think about it a lot. The firm turns 40 this year, and we're using that anniversary to take the time to take a step back and reflect on the trends that you're talking about, because the industry really is at an inflection point for the reasons you've said. It also raises the question, what is the future for the firms that choose not to chase that strategy? And the conclusion we've come to is you certainly don't want to be left in the middle. If you're going to chase that strategy, there are some great managers that are doing it. They're building very diversified product businesses. They have aggressive AUM goals that they're targeting. And then there are going to be those that are going to take a more measured approach to growth, like ourselves. We do want to grow. Without growth, there is no lifeblood in our industry. But the question is, how do we grow? And what is our guiding light? And when we've asked ourselves that question in the last year, coming into this 40th anniversary, what we've concluded is there is tremendous strength to remaining private equity focus. You can maintain that alpha focus. You don't necessarily need to spend the majority of your time thinking about where the next dollar of assets under management will come from, but you can spend your time the way that deal doers want to spend their time. Where's the best investment opportunity? Where can I turn $1 into 4 or 5? And the thing that we've found is that focus attracts the best talent. So there's this harmony between maintaining the performance focus and, in our view, attracting the best talent. And it allows us to go incredibly deep in our subsectors. It allows us to be incredibly relevant in the regions in which we're playing. And we're able to curate this amazing ecosystem of talent, operating partners and executives and operations advisors around that nucleus of deal making that we've built. So like I said, we're going to diversify. We have an ambition to diversify away from our flagship fund, but it's still going to be a guiding light for us that it's going to be private equity focused.
So I feel like I know the answer to this. Advent ever go public?
We are not planning to go public. So full stop, end of story. You look like I'm fencing.
Executives say, and then you have them back when they've done it. And they say, I swear we weren't planning on it.
No, so the only caveat we would say is, if ever there was a moment in time where we felt like not being public left us at a competitive disadvantage, if the tectonic plate shifted in a way where all of a sudden we can't do the things we need to do to be great investors, we will revisit that assumption. But to be clear, the assumption, the going in view that we have, that we told our whole company just a week ago at our 40th anniversary is, that's not our plan.
When you talk about a competitive disadvantage, because I think what some of the bigger firms will say, and they're obviously talking their own book, is that they can go out to the biggest pension and sovereign wealth funds in the world and say, we have all of these products, we can do everything for you, we can give you a discount on fees, and here you come doing the yeoman's work, passing the hat, and saying, we're just going to do this one thing, but I swear like the returns are better. And at what point does that start to change?
Well, arguably, maybe it already has to some extent, because in the last 12 months, more than 50% of the dollars that were raised by alternative asset managers were raised by the top 20 firms. So you're seeing this concentration of where the dollars are going to the big players. But when I talk to investors, they still really care about performance. And they are looking at benchmarking data, and when you sit across from them with your array of products, they will choose those products with which they think you can outperform the field. So as long as you've built a model that maintains that alpha focus, there's going to be a home, in our view, for us and for many of the other single specialty private equity focused players for years to come.
Okay. I kind of have this theory, and I'm sure you're going to tell me why I'm wrong, that sort of pure private equity, the corporate LBO, the thing that this entire industry was built on, is challenged going forward, that companies today are better run than they used to be. There's less fat to cut. Activist investors have done a lot of that for you. Debt is never going to be as cheap as it was for as long as it was. Like, tell me why I'm wrong.
So the question is, are the good times over? Is that?
Yeah, the jig is up.
The jig is up.
Yeah.
Look, was it easier in the 80s when you could borrow 8 turns and pay 9 and debt was less, yeah, it might have been easy. But I think the industry's evolved in such a way that we're not in the buying and selling of businesses anymore. We are, that's what we do, but we're in the business building business. And there's still ample opportunity to find and build better businesses, particularly with the resources that we can bring to bear. But I look at what we did over the last 12 to 18 months, a number of carve-outs, a number of public to privates. I personally think that there are a number of those still to come in the next 12 to 18 months. And there's the return of the private equity seller. We can hold our assets only for so long because the investors do want to get their money back at some point. And in my view, yes, a lot of capital has been raised, but the tools that the industry are bringing to the party to make these businesses better are evolving. 10 years ago, we didn't have a portfolio support group function, people that come out of industry, deep functional expertise. Now we've got a team of over 50 people globally. 3 years ago, we didn't have a digital team that was helping both Advent as well as our portfolio companies get on the cutting edge of what are the ML or AI opportunities or threats. Now we've got a dedicated team. So the tools that we're bringing to the party, they're evolving in a way that I think we're always going to be able to find some opportunity.
Okay. Fair to say, though, it's not a growth industry in the way that it used to be.
I would disagree with that.
You would? Okay.
I would disagree with that. So over the last 20 years, alts has grown at a double-digit rate, and all the analysts would say it's going to continue to grow at a
But a lot of that has
double-digit rate.
happened in real estate and credit and infrastructure and some other places.
It certainly has happened in a number of different ways, but even when you focus just on equity, the mushrooming of ideas that can support equity growth from core funds, long-dated funds, tactical ops funds that can be hybrid debt equity, more sector-focused funds, deeper regional funds, on and on and on. Value-added infrastructure, some would say fall out of a category of traditional infrastructure. So there's still ample ways in which the industry can continue to maintain that 10% growth rate plus.
I ask that because I think there's a sense that we should have seen more consolidation than we have. I'm curious why you think we haven't seen a ton of that at the manager level.
We're starting to see it. I don't think we've seen it yet because most of these firms are run by big personalities. Professional services firms don't tend to come together well. There's a litany of disasters that we can profile in banking and other professional services organizations. And ultimately, what has to be right as a table stakes matter of fact is the cultures need to align. And different private equity firms have wildly different cultures, despite the fact that we're all trying to do the same thing. And I think that dynamic and the fact that it was such a growth industry, the early innings didn't necessitate the consolidation. We're just now starting to see it, which maybe you would argue isn't that a sign that we're closer to middle innings? And that may be the case.
Pivoting a little bit, your background is in healthcare investing.
Yes.
A lot of scrutiny right now in that space after some pretty bad outcomes, I think. Elizabeth Warren just introduced a bill called the Corporate Crimes Against Healthcare Act.
Looters, I think there's
Called looters, yeah.
looters
But I mean, more broadly, I think Americans really hate the idea of investors running these businesses for profit. So can you talk about sort of how you think about it? Is there a way to do it responsibly? Is there a point at which you should do everything but patient care and just stop while you're ahead?
So this is a great question. And the approach that we've taken is we will never invest in a business that we don't think is better for the system. So that is the approach we've taken. If you're in healthcare investing, there needs to be some element of what you're doing, which is mission driven. You need to think about, there's a lot of talk in healthcare of the triple aim. We talk about the quadruple aim, which in addition to cost and patient outcomes and patient experience, it adds the notion of you also need to think about the provider, the healthcare professional, particularly on the heels of COVID, when there were so many disaffected providers that were stressed and felt like they're putting themselves in harm's way. Our view is you need to make it work for a patient. You need to make it work for a provider. You also need to make it work for the system. And with that mission orientation, that's what's driven our deal making in the industry over a long period of time. And that's not to say that there haven't been some incidents that the press has written about that deserve greater scrutiny. The only point that I would make to Elizabeth Warren, if she were here, is it's easy to paint an entire industry with a big bad brush when what you're talking about are a couple of incidents that had obviously bad outcomes. But to ignore the good things that have happened paints a very unbalanced narrative that I think is unfortunate because there, in many instances, are benefits to scale. For every company that got bigger, and much of the criticism is investors doing M&A, doing these roll-ups, and nothing good comes of it except pricing leverage, and that's bad for the system. Well, I would say invariably there must have been some instances of that. But for every one of those, there were dozens and dozens of other companies that, as they got bigger, invested in a better compliance, invested in better patient outcomes and patient experience, that built better businesses. And I think the balance narrative needs to come into the picture in order for anything effective to happen. And again, if Elizabeth Warren were here, I might suggest there's a lot of great ideas, not to mention capital and insight and innovation that can come from the private sector. And to try and bar that sector from being part of the solution, I think is not going to achieve a great outcome.
Okay. The basic building block of private equity has been that traditional 7, 8, 10-year fund. It's starting to crack a little bit, and I think we've seen all kinds of sort of plaster shoved in the cracks. We've seen portfolio loans, continuation funds, secondaries. I guess, is this just a weird moment where the IPO market's shut and you have to kind of stall for time, or is it actually like worth rethinking that model?
That's a great question. One of the ways that I've thought about it is the closed-end fund structure where we raise a fund every 4 to 6 years. It's both a challenge and an opportunity. It's a challenge because it's time intensive. We are traveling the earth to meet with the largest institutional investors. It requires a lot of effort from a lot of people in the organization. But it's only half the story because there is an opportunity in that because by virtue of having to do that, we get this opportunity to be across from the largest institutional investors in the world to sell ourselves, but also to understand how their needs are changing. And their needs are changing rapidly, not just the sovereign wealth funds, but US pension funds. Their needs are evolving, and by being in front of them, we can have a better sense of how we can tailor our business in a way that's better for them. Now, the creativity that's solving the fact that there are no exits, some of it's good, but some of the investors would say we don't love all of it. We don't love NAV loans. They feel like that's leverage on leverage. We have never done it.
It is leverage on leverage.
It is leverage on leverage. We have never done it. CVs, interestingly, some institutional investors would say we don't love those because in theory, CV is a continuation vehicle. You sell it to yourself in some ways, and there's fear that you're not necessarily maximizing value. And investors, when given the choice to buy or sell in that deal, some investors feel like they don't really have much of a choice. But it does afford them the opportunity to make that choice.
Last one is secondaries. Little different animal, but a space that actually I'm surprised you guys aren't in or don't have some ambitions to be in. It sits pretty nicely next to an equities business that you're already in. Curious kind of what you make of that. There's a thriving ecosystem in selling pieces of each other to yourselves and of your funds. What do you make of that?
Look, it is one of the fastest growing parts of the alternative universe right now, in part because the IPO window has not been as open, because the private equity buyer hasn't been as robust as it once was. So you're seeing a lot of money flood into secondaries. And it's something that we've thought about it, and I would bifurcate GP-led from LP-led secondaries, so there is this distinction. It's not something that we would necessarily rule out. It does fall into that framework of being private equity focused, and the skill set for doing secondary deals when you're particularly buying single asset or multi-assets, it's not that dissimilar from the type of underwriting that we do in regular way private equity.
Just got a couple seconds left. You're investing out of it. We're just talking about, I asked you whether your strategy was a fundraising disadvantage. You raised a giant fund 2 years ago.
May of 22.
$25 billion, it's a lot of money to put to work. Where are you focused? What are you finding to invest in?
We feel fortunate in that we are about 40% invested in that fund to date. Because we've got 5 sectors in incredible geographic breadth, the term that we use is we've got dynamic allocation of capital. We don't have hard dollars that need to be invested in this sector or that region. We've got regional investment committees that are able to curate the best opportunities and make yes or no decisions. So last year we invested $8.3 billion in 12 platform investments and 14 follow-ons. And when we reflect on it's early, but when we think about the deals that we did, we're excited about them. We did a couple of luxury deals, Zimmerman and Parfum de Marly. We did this take private of a space intelligence company called Maxar. We did a pharma services carve out from Baxter. These were all very bespoke deals. And again, early days, but we're incredibly excited about the investments that we did make.
Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.